if I'm always looking back on the stuff that's really worked, it's usually a fairly simple idea, well executed. And it may be quite complex beneath the surface, but it's very simple in terms of its execution back to consumers, and that makes a difference. And I think sometimes we sort of lose that with, we want to make it more complicated with the back end and how we deliver things, rather than necessarily just getting something that works for a consumer and works effectively.
Jobs in AdTech.
If you're looking for a new role in the industry, there's only one place to go. Free job listing for all recruiters and talent acquisition managers until September. Go to jobsinadtech.com today.
Jobs in AdTech.
Hello and welcome to the Shiny New Object podcast. My name is Tom Ollerton. I'm the founder of Automated Creative. We are a creative effectiveness ad tech platform, but today we are doing a podcast, and I am here in Cannes with Paul Wright, who is head of Uber advertising in the UK. Paul, thanks so much for inviting me to your fancy villa. Can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hi there, Tom. Thank you for inviting me onto this podcast. It's great. So a little bit about me. I've had a fairly long career in advertising. Started at Sky when it first started years ago, and has been in digital since about late 90s. Worked with a couple of startups, including one of my own, which we sold. And I've worked across some interesting tech companies, including Apple and Amazon, and joined Uber about 6 months ago.
So in terms of your career and your 9 million different employers you've had, you can see on Paul's LinkedIn, what has been your biggest screw up, your biggest facepalm moment that at the time you were like bright red with embarrassment and shame, but now you look back on it, you're glad it happened?
Yeah, my biggest, I think it's this, there was a moment, so I was working for a startup and we'd raised $100 million, and we went into administration rather rapidly 2 years later. It was a sports business and we went to bust on the first day of the World Cup, which is a pretty spectacular way to go. So I think everyone was like looking, going, what the hell happened there? And then the germ of an idea came out with me and a couple of three of my team members to come up with a business which we created, which was an ad network, but an ad network focused around working with sports rights holders who, as you can probably appreciate, pretty complex, because they've got very complex relationships with commercial companies outside of what they do online. So we came up with a model, and then that model turned into a business. That business turned into about $7 million turnover, and we sold it 4 years later. So yeah, really tough time with administration and, being kicked out, but turned it around, and that team did really well.
And over the years, you've worked alongside lots of different marketing operations. And what's the best thing you've learned? What's your top tip that you find yourself always sharing or passing on?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, particularly over the last few years, I think there's a sort of, there's a lot of complexity in what we do, with data and all those things. But I think if I'm always looking back on the stuff that's really worked, it's usually a fairly simple idea, well executed. And it may be quite complex beneath the surface, but it's very simple in terms of its execution back to consumers, and that makes a difference. And I think sometimes we sort of lose that with, we want to make it more complicated with the back end and how we deliver things, rather than necessarily just getting something that works for a consumer and works effectively.
So we're now going to move on to your shiny new object, which is context and attention in marketing in 15 minutes. So context and attention doesn't sound like that much of a shiny new object, but why are you passionate about that now? And why have you chosen that?
I mean, yeah, Tom, I could have come in here and talked about AI, but we're not going to do that today. I think, again, it goes back to this thing about complexity. I think if you think about consumer experience now in a digital environment and non-digital environment, we are showing ads to them in many, many ways. But the thing that really matters, and I've seen this throughout my career actually, with a lot of companies I've worked with, where ads work effectively when the context is really spot on. So one of the things I remember years ago at Sky, we were debating whether we would ever put a centre break into Sky Movies. So you break up a movie by putting an ad break in there. And we decided that was the wrong thing, because that would have created the wrong thing to do from a consumer perspective, because their context was that they were buying Sky Movies as a pay channel. And the idea of us breaking it up with advertising sort of went against that. We did place advertising, and Sky still does, at the beginning and end of movies. So that was one thing. And then again, at other places, I've seen, the greater, the better the context, the better it works. And I think, so we've seen some stuff all the way through to what we do at Uber in terms of getting it the right time, right place. And then that comes with attention. And I think the big challenge with a lot of digital businesses now is, the desire for revenue sometimes overlooks the consumer experience. And then you end up with, multiple ads on the same page or the same app, and it just gets in the way. And then the consumer is going to switch off. But if you can come up with something that says, right, here's some simple solutions or a simple way of playing it out, people will spend the time there. But if the context is right, then that's even better. So if you're going to serve an ad to someone, where they're going, that's helpful. It's better than just serving ads randomly across the internet. So we've got to get back to a little bit about what I think a lot of the original advertising work that was done when media stuff became a thing was always about getting the context right. And that creates attention, and that creates benefit to the brand.
This episode of the Shiny New Object podcast is brought to you in partnership with Madfest. Whether it's live in London or streamed online to the global marketing community, you can always expect a distinctive and daring blend of fast-paced content, startup innovation pitches, and unconventional entertainment from Madfest events. You'll find me causing trouble on stage, recording live versions of this podcast, and sharing a beer with the nicest and most influential people in marketing. Check it out at www.madfestlondon.com.
So, how are you guys doing it? How are you using Uber's data, Uber's technology to serve ads with the right context?
So what we do with so we've got two parts to our business, and I'll talk predominantly in this case about both actually have relevance. So the first one is in the ride side of the business, we serve ads to people in the app as they're progressing through their connecting with a driver and all the way through to the end of their journey. And with that, we're very careful with what data we use, but simple data like where someone's going, what time of day it is, that type of thing is very, very powerful. So we've run campaigns with music labels where they've been targeting people we've dropped off at a music venue in the last 3 months. And that proved incredibly effective, very high engagement rates, and over 2 minutes engagement rates, and very high click rates, which would suggest a good engagement from the consumer. But it's also a very clean environment. On the Eat side, there's a different model, but it works the same principle, is that most people come into Uber Eats knowing they want a delivery, but they don't know what they want. So therefore, again, the context is the user needs to be thinking about that. With the user, you want to make sure that you can make a right offering to them, so that the restaurant partners or the convenience partners can go, hey, here we are. Would you like to go with this brand or that brand? And that works again very well. And we know, where you are. So that's a location thing. So which restaurants should be there that you can see that, you can get delivery from, that type of thing. So again, both of those work in very different ways, but are only quite similar. But also in the Eats environment, we have a thing called post-checkout ads, which we're at the moment where you've made the order and you're waiting for the order to arrive. And that's contextually very important time, because you're probably sitting there going, right, I've got my food coming or my other order coming. What am I going to do when it arrives? And therefore, we've had lots of success with brands who want to, push people to watch a movie or a video clip or whatever else it happens to be from that to kill that time or to fill the time after the delivery comes.
So, Odd, kind of sales question here, I guess. Like, what are the objections to this that you get? Because it makes a lot of sense to me, right? So you as you say, you've got time of day, you've got location, direction or destination, sorry, and the fact they've been to a music venue, they probably like music, so let's give them a music ad. Where's the kind of sticking point? When does it not land?
Well, I think there's two things. One is, I think we just have to. We're very early stages, so we don't know what probably doesn't, what works and what doesn't work in that purest way, because we've got lots of people testing stuff and we're learning all the time. I think the challenge will be, as we grow, and the question is always one of what happens as you run more of these things on the platform. We haven't seen any drop off in performance, so that can often happen, and so I've seen that happen in other platforms before, where in early stage you get very high engagement, but not afterwards. And then I think we, obviously, from a measurement and delivery perspective, have to make sure that we're working effectively with the relevant parties in the industry to make sure we're doing all the right things there, because we want to do that. And then the final thing is we're always very careful with our data usage, so we want to make sure that we do always the right thing. And we've taken some decisions, to have our data policies on our website, but we've taken decisions about what we will allow and what we won't allow. And I think the great thing about being a business like us is we're not an ad business in pure sense. Obviously, we are a delivery mobility company, and therefore we can make those decisions perhaps a bit easier. But we've made it very clear this is how we're going to do stuff, and we're not going to vary from that.
And what's been the most creative use of the platform that you're most proud of, or what's your killer case study where you're like, look how great this is?
I think we've got in Europe we've got a couple of really good examples. I mean, I think we're running one at the moment where we're targeting tourists in London, because we can identify where people's sort of home destination base is, and that's proven very effective. Very simple, but it's very difficult to break out tourists within any other environment, because obviously there's lots of people in London. So how do you know who's a tourist or not? But we do. I think also we had, there's a couple of things about where their account was set up is an indicator. And also we use a principle called primary city. So most people have a city where they do most of their Uber drive usage, which is also indicate a place that they might well live. So we use that type of setup to make it work. And then we've got another campaign we did with Warner Music for Ed Sheeran. And that one was a very interesting model because it was targeted at people who went to music venues. And it was around the weekend of the launch of the new album. Very effective, very high click rate, just under 3% click rate, I believe, and very high engagement time. Both of those are very good, simple examples of how we can use, effective data and context to really drive success.
So who do you look up to outside of your business that you think is commandeering context in a successful way? Who do you think is serving you ads where you're like, oh, you've made a really good example of that? Or is it a case that context really is ignored and it's just a case of volume and hit and hope?
I don't know. I think I personally, my personal experience is I always like moments where there's something there that it comes through and you're like, oh, well, that's good. I'm sort of into that. It doesn't happen very often, maybe because, I've been doing this a long time. So I don't think, I do think, the simplicity thing, I think, is the thing that I'm always most appealed by when I see a single ad just nicely presented in a format. I mean, it's a bit of context, but it's also the British Airways one that won the Cannes Lion, which was with Uncommon. That was quite an interesting approach of context as well. So good locations, but also the choices. Why are you flying with British Airways? That was quite an interesting one that appealed to me for some reason, because I think it recognised that it's not just about this gloss of flying somewhere, but what is your reason for your journey? Which I thought was quite that's a human context rather than a brand context, perhaps.
because my view on this is that years ago I did a stand-up comedy course, right? And that wasn't very funny, unfortunately. Apart from that, I went really well. But there was a line in the training that said, if they're thinking, they're not laughing. So if someone's on stage and they're saying a joke and you're having to process it as opposed to just involuntarily laughing. And I think that's what advertising should be like. And I know we're a bit scarred because we work in the industry. So we see the thing that surrounds it. But I think from a consumer thing, they shouldn't see an Ed Sheeran ad. They should think, I like Ed Sheeran, I'm going to click on that thing. And as soon as you think about the ad that you're looking at, then it's toast. But you should just respond to it. If it's an awareness thing, it should just go in and build that memory structure. If it's a consideration thing, whack it in a basket or buy it or whatever it is. But
no, I'd agree. I think that's what we saw. I mean, right time, right place, so critical with no thinking. Oh, that's good. I like music. I'm going to click here. I'm going to listen, or I'm interested in this new show on the streaming platform X or Y. I want to go and test it out. Those types of things make a huge difference.
So unfortunately, we're at the end of the podcast now. So if someone wants to get in touch with you to talk about context and attention and advertising, where's the best place to get in touch, and what makes a good outreach message to you?
Well, email and LinkedIn for me. A good outreach email is generally not a sales pitch, because I get quite a few of those, as you might expect. But some just someone being interested in having a conversation about stuff and then taking it from there. Because there's some great ideas, but they often particularly on LinkedIn, but generally they get lost in translation when someone's trying to do a sales pitch.
Well, thank you so much for your time and enjoy the rest of the festival. Hi. Just before you go, I'd really appreciate it if you could take the time to write a review of the Shiny New Object podcast on Apple Podcasts or iTunes, whatever it's called these days, or whichever podcast provider you use. We're an indie podcast, so it would go a long way for us if you could just share the word and give us a bit of a support on those channels. That would just be fantastic. If you haven't got time, that's also cool. And yeah, if you could tell your colleagues about the podcast, and also, if possible, don't forget to subscribe. And I'd love to hear your feedback. If you'd like to speak on the podcast or be a guest, or you think I'm asking the wrong questions, anything, I'd be super interested to hear what you think. So please email me at tom@automatedcreative.net. That's TOM at, I'm not going to bother spelling it. Anyway, you'll work it out. Thanks so much.